Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this smoke effect on the road. So, I'm Alex Sokolblosser, the winemaker and co-president at Sokolblosser Winery. So before I get going, I want to introduce the sponsor of this tasting. So let me introduce Cody Starnes. Cody is from Cottage Grove. Hopefully you Oregonians know where Cottage Grove is. Yes, there are some people who know where Cottage Grove is. I got to know Cody a lot this summer because I bought a pull-behind Pellenc mechanical harvester. So we're not going to be talking about that, but I will say I can vouch that Cody says what he does and does what he says. So Cody, come on up and tell us about John Deere and Pellenc.
All right. Well, thanks a bunch, Alex. He certainly knows how to talk somebody up. So just wanted to, more than anything, come up here real quick and just say thank you to all you guys. We seriously appreciate being a part of the industry. It's fantastic to see everybody back here. It's great to all be under the same roof again. The last couple of years have been interesting, to say the least, but it looks like we're all on the right trajectory and headed back in the right direction. So again, thank you. Real quick, we just wanted to show a quick video on some of the things that we do as a dealership and kind of our part in the industry. So real quick, again, thank you. And here's a quick video from Pape Machinery and Pellenc America. Thanks.
All right, let's give it up for Pape Machinery. Yes, they have some of the big, beautiful machines out in the corner. Okay, welcome to the Up in Smoke tasting. Yes, it is a Cheech and Chong themed seminar, so you might see some things in that realm. So let me introduce our illustrious panel. We have Brian Gruber, who is the winemaker from Irvine and Roberts from down in Ashland. Yes, thank you, Brian. People traveled a long ways up here to good old Portland. Brian, I talked to Brian a lot during the harvest of 2020. Brian developed the moniker Smoke Whisperer for us at Sokolblosser just because Brian has dealt with smoke before and calmed me down. So thank you, Smoke Whisperer. Brandon Moss from Walla Walla Valley, grew up in Walla Walla Valley, went to Oregon State, and yes, so Brandon with Gramercy Cellars, the winemaker, so he brought a couple wines, so give it up for Brandon. And last but not least, our illustrious Dr. Elizabeth Tomasino, Associate Professor of Enology at Oregon State. Elizabeth, in the course of maybe a week, changed a lot of machinery at Oregon State University so we could send samples down there in 2020 and get some samples and get some results so we can make some picking decisions. So Elizabeth and her team, I didn't talk to you as much as I talked to Brian, but we did talk the harvest of 2020. So give it up for Elizabeth and Oregon State University for helping us tremendously. All right, so actually I think I need to do this, right? Oh yeah, up in smoke, sorry. There you go, ha ha ha. Yep. So you think you know smoke. So I'm gonna hand this over to Dr. Tomasino here. A lot of the photos in here were taken from the harvest of 2020. So this photo right here was, I bought grapes from a vineyard called Tungi out in the Channel Mountains. This photo was taken by Chad Vargas. He texted me that photo and I went, dude, where are you? He's like, I'm at Tungi. I'm like, are you kidding me? So that was how crazy the vintage was. Okay, Dr. Tomasino.
Thank you so much. A lot of questions I've gotten over the past 2 years was really how people know if their wine is smoke tainted from tasting it. So we spent time trying to create a standard to train people. So we brought it with you guys today because I still get this question, and after you taste this, you will not have a problem realizing what smoke taint is in the future, because there's a lot that goes on in wine, so sometimes it can be tricky. So the little black cup is our smoke standard. I want you to do this first, so taste it. It's an in-mouth standard because that smoke taint really presents first in your mouth. Swish it around, and then we started a little late because we need to spit this. And then breathe and give it about 30 seconds. And I describe this as a day-old campfire or an ashtray, but we'll see how you guys describe it. Before you taste it, I haven't said go yet. Before you taste it, realize some people are going to be very sensitive to this. So the people making the face will be very sensitive to it. Some people are moderate tasters. I'm a moderate taster. And some people might not be able to taste anything at all. There is a sensitivity to this. So just be aware. But go ahead and give it a taste and a swirl and a spit. It's too bad the lights are bright. I love seeing people's faces.
Yeah, is anyone gagged yet? Yep, a couple people, sorry. There's beer later.
Yes.
Someone says it's nasty. I think one reason why this is amazing is a lot of people say, oh, that wine is smoky, and then another person says, no, it's not smoky. So actually having a smoke standard, so when Dr. Tomasino says she's gonna bring a smoke standard, I'm like, aha, this is gonna be cool. And oh my God, this is awful.
Well, notice I didn't taste it. We tasted a lot of things coming up with this. The reason we're doing this up front as well, OSU is going to be putting out an extension document, hopefully sometime this spring. This smoke taint lingers in your mouth over time. So if you're tasting wine very quickly, you might rank something as very smoky that's not. So I'm going to go talk just a little background on what happens with smoke when it's in your vineyard. And you guys just notice, I might ask a little later on, it's like, who's still experiencing the smoke in your mouth? Because it can last for a while. Sounds like we have a lot of sensitive tasters, I'm assuming, in the room based on comments, but that is what you have. And we'll also be releasing how to make this, because you can make this at home. It's not fancy chemicals or anything. So later this spring, Dr. Osborne and myself will be providing that resource for everyone. But just as a reminder, I'm sure everyone's heard this before, but we normally do this at the start of a lot of the smoke workshops, how grape smoke exposure works. So you have smoke coming into your vineyard. The grapes are there. There's a lot of things going on in smoke. And certain compounds will be absorbed through the grape skin. And within the grape, and you'll be able to smell that smoke, lovely smell of smoke. And when they're absorbed into the grape skin, a lot of what happens within the grape is those compounds, and I have put several on this slide for you, become bound to sugar. And when they're bound to sugar, they don't have a flavor anymore. So you can't go out and taste your grapes and say, oh, it has a problem or not. We don't know, because you can't taste it anymore. And then during winemaking, these bound smoke compounds become free again, and that's when you start noticing a problem, and it doesn't all happen at once. It some happens over fermentation, some happens during aging, for it, and there's some testing out there for it, and I'm going to talk at the end about some research going on about what's happening. But that's the really complicated aspect of smoke taint. It's very hard to know what's going on in the grape or what type of smoke, because not all smoke is equal. So some smoke will create a problem in your grapes and wine, and some will and some won't, and you can't just look at it and be able to say that. But I'm getting ahead of myself for it. We have some nicer things to taste than my smoke standard. But that's the very, very basis of smoke taint. So compounds in the air, absorbed into the grape, bound up so you can't taste them anymore. And then during fermentation, they start to be released. And that's when you can start notice an impact to quality.
Great. Thank you. So now you know who you haven't tasted smoke affected before. Now you know. You got
Who's still got it in the mouth? Anyone? Yeah, see how long it lasts? Yep.
I want to get it out of my mouth. But you know what? I'm going to talk a little bit, so hopefully it'll wear out after I keep going. Okay, so let me tell you what the seminar is not about. Back in 2019, there was a seminar up here that talked about, and you can go back and look at past seminars, and it's still very valuable today and relevant, is there was a seminar about, okay, so there's fire and there's smoke out in the vineyard. This, they talked about how you can get your vineyard ready, how you get the winemaking ready, how you get all that stuff ready. Okay, this seminar is about, okay, so you harvested the grapes, you made wine, now what? You got the wine, now what are you gonna do? So that's what the seminar is about. We are going to be focusing on, so now you've got smoke-affected wine, what are you going to do? So one thing I want everyone to realize, and I'm going to ask everyone to give it up one more time for Brian and for Brandon, is because not everyone is willing to share in front of all their peers the wine that they've made and the wine that they've smoke remediated. So please give it up one more time to Brian and Brandon, because sharing is caring. So yes, the wine in front of you is wine that they worked hard at to make marketable. So the goal with this seminar is we realize there's not a lot of silver bullets out there, right? There's nothing as, Elizabeth doesn't have a magic wand that she can give us and wave, and it'll make things all better. But what you walk away from today is some tools that can help make your wine marketable so you can live another day and hopefully come up with a vintage like 2021, and then you realize, shit, I made it. Okay, I can keep going. So that's what this seminar is about. So I'm gonna do a little bit of options of what we'll be talking about, and that is we're gonna be talking about kind of three overall things. Mechanical removal, we're dealing with reverse osmosis, which I'll turn it over to Brian pretty soon. A resin column, that's something that actually we tried using at Sokol Blosser Winery. One is made by Jeff Morrell at SRX. You got fining options. I know there are some people in the audience who dumped a lot of whole milk into their wine. Carbon, you know, we've tried, we used some Granicol carbon we bought from Scott Labs. No, these things are, you use them together. They go hand in hand. So it's not just one of these things is gonna work. Other enzymes, clean lees. I know some people said, oh, with my 2020s, I'm gonna, you know, take them off and put them on some clean 2021 lees and hope that that might be a trick. Other proteins out there. And then another idea is you cover it up. You mask it. How much lipstick can you put on the pig? What can we do? What does that lipstick look like? Well, the lipstick could be sugar, yeah. That subtle sucrosity that we all know, that people say they don't like sweet wine, but actually do. You can blend it away, right? You can blend it away. And then maybe you want to add some, 5% of a fresher vintage like 2021. So you can still call it 2020. You're only getting 5%. Is TTB here? Did I say that right? Okay. So these are the kind of things we'll be talking about. So, Brian, let's get a quick once-over on RO.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. No, I think that was a really important point, right? Those were not things that are mutually exclusive. And with some of the wines we've worked with, we've probably done the majority of these things, or at least tried them on the wines. And one of the key things that we've been able to work with is reverse osmosis. It's the process both Brandon and I used on the wines you're going to taste here. And the idea behind this, it's proven. It's been used for decades, and not just in the wine industry, but water treatment and a lot of other places. I've used it previously on VA removal and alcohol removal as well. And the idea is that it's a reasonably gentle method for splitting your wine and just treating the part that's the problem. So high pressure pump pushes your wine through a membrane. That membrane splits the wine into streams. Ideally, you set the size of the particles in your membrane to just pull out water, alcohol, and whatever you're trying to treat. You treat the water, alcohol, and in this case, smoke, and then put the wines back together. And so the idea being you're not going to strip out the good things because they never see the membrane. Typically with smoke, we're using carbon filters as our treatment media. And oftentimes you've got to pass the wine through not just once, but twice or even 3 times through. You can see every time you pass through, you remove some of it, but not all of it. And typically we do it by taste.
Cool. Raise your hands if you worked with RO before. Okay, so that's good. That's why we wanted to give a little onesie over on the RO. Okay, so you can't have a presentation without having some quotes. So it's hard to find quotes about smoke, folks. It really is. But Benjamin Disraeli, a very famous old British politician, he's most famous for this quote. He said, there are 3 types of lies. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So you may have heard that one? No, you haven't heard that one? Okay, well there's that one. And then of course, Cheech said this one, if you haven't seen Up in Smoke, I encourage you to watch it. I don't know if it's aged well, but this is right from that one. Okay, yeah, actually that was a funny scene. So thank you, Maria. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Brandon, and Brandon, I'm gonna give you the clicker, because you have some cool slides, dude.
Thank you. Just the green.
Yeah, the green.
Okay. All right, thank you guys. So from Gramercy, you're going to have 2 samples in front of you. It's both Cab Franc from the Walla Walla Valley. We're in a little different scenario than you were in Oregon. We did have smoke, but I would not say it was as dense as what we saw in Oregon. So there was a little more unknown in Washington than there was in Oregon. I think in Oregon, you pretty much assumed that smoke taint was going to happen on your grapes, and it was about remediating them in the winery. Whereas Walla Walla, it was kind of the great unknown. It was, is the smoke dense enough to have penetrated into my grapes? Am I going to have problems? A lot of it was really unknown for us at harvest. And then you also had Oregon State to test your grapes. We were in a little different scenario where we were at about a 3 to 4 week wait time on smoke tests in our vineyards. And so it really changed the decisions we had to make in the vineyard and in the winery for how to react. And so with this Cab Franc, first we have a little slide on our way out to the vineyard, trying to get through the smoke to actually go sample our grapes. So, all right. So with this Cab Franc, because of the unknowns and whether or not this was going to have smoke taint or not, we wanted to follow a pretty similar protocol to how we would normally make the Cab Franc. So we handpicked it. We do a very light sulfuring up front. We do native yeast cultures on everything. The main difference with this wine is we wanted to get this wine fermenting right away, because if we noticed a smoke taint problem, we wanted to get it off the skins immediately. But we really didn't notice any aromatic smoke taint issues or palate smoke taint issues until pretty much the end of fermentation. So this was actually on the skins for 15 days. As you can see, the final chemistry, a little low on the acid, but fairly well balanced. Overall, coming out of fermentation, this wine tasted quite good until I went to the barrels about a month later and really started to notice the smoke picking up. So it was very promising at first and then went pretty quickly downhill from there. All right, so for smoke remediation on this wine, as recommended, we waited about 10 months before we brought in the RO. This is basically to allow some oxygen to kind of cleave the glycosylated smoke compounds. Whether or not this works or not, that was kind of our protocol and recommendations. For the Cab Franc, we actually ran 50% of the volume of the wine through the carbon column. I'd say the most impactful thing I would say about treating a wine for smoke taint is you need to be there tasting every probably half an hour, because the more of that wine you run through that carbon filter, the more you're stripping all the good compounds as well as the smoke compounds. So if you run a wine, 100% of your volume through that carbon column, you're basically going to have a shell of a wine. So then what's the point, So we have 2 samples. We can go ahead and taste them right after this slide here. So we'll just kind of taste them in succession. We have the first wine is pre-treatment, and the second wine is post-treatment. Again, this treatment was done in August, right before the 2021 vintage. So everyone can go ahead and taste at your convenience. 2 and 3.
So I guess one of the questions, Brandon, is when you taste the pre, does this taste as smoky as you remember it?
Not quite as smoky as I remember it before the actual treatment, but at the same time, where I really pick up the smokiness on this wine is on the palate. To me, I get that bitterness, that ashiness on the palate, kind of floats down the middle of your tongue. That's where it really hits me on this wine, and honestly, I kind of found out that I'm maybe a smoke-sensitive taster, because I went through all the barrels and I presented the wine to people, and they're like, "Oh, do you really get smoke on there?" And yeah, I got smoke on there. So some people are more sensitive than others, and I'd rather err on the side of making sure that the wine is clean and right, and doing the proper procedures to fix it. So,
Well, I'll say I'm not as sensitive. I'm a medium one, and I just got a little bit on this one in the back. Not necessarily objectionable, but just for those of you who might not be as sensitive, I think you are a very sensitive taster.
Actually, can I ask, when you taste, raise your hand if you taste smoke effect on glass number 2. Okay. Raise your hand if you didn't. Okay. Those of us who, yeah, it's all right. You can be like me.
yeah, so to me, I really like what the RO did in terms of taking out that ashiness on the palate. The only thing I didn't like is I felt like it lost some of its frankiness. Its varietal character. To me, it's kind of innocuous red wine, which is, if you're blending it away into a big blend, it's not the end of the world. If I was making 100% Cab Franc, I don't think I would be okay releasing that to anyone. But as a blender, as a blending component, 100% works. In addition, like you could try putting it on fresh lees. I think that might bring back some of that varietal character, so you can really make a useful wine out of this. All right, so I just wanted to put a couple graphs up here. This is a really interesting study that I found that basically correlates smoke taint to different varietals. So different varietals are more susceptible to picking up smoke taint. What we see in this study is they show that Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot are more prevalent to picking up smoke taint compared to both Pinot Noir and Shiraz. We have noticed this on a sensory term in the winery, where when we've been tasting Cab Franc and Petit Verdot in particular in the winery, we get extreme smoke taint on those varietals, whereas tasting maybe Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon compared to those two varietals, we notice much less, as well as Syrah. So it's very interesting, and you could actually make some decisions based on these graphs in terms of what to plant in an area that might be susceptible to smoke taint. And then how to handle it in the winery. So it can help you making some decisions, kind of knowing what varietals are more susceptible to actually picking up smoke taint. All right, so kind of things we picked up from this study here. One interesting component that I had not really heard before is right after exposure to smoke, photosynthesis will actually be halted. Depending on the varietal, it could be more impactful for more days, but you're looking anywhere between 10 and 20 days of actually low photosynthesis, so low sugar accumulation. So depending on when this happens in the season, it could really shut down your harvest. So then in terms of what to do when those grapes come into the winery, there's definitely a correlation between skin contact time and smoke prevalence. So, best case scenario, make your white Pinot Noirs, Rosé. You might still have to smoke treat it after the fact, but you're going to minimize the effects of what's coming into the winery. As stated, depending on the varietal, you're going to have a different impact from smoke taint. We saw that Pinot Noir is pretty highly affected in 2020, but that's because the fires were so close. I think if the fires were farther away, we would not have as much of an issue. So it can affect what you decide to plant in a certain area depending on that, though. And then in the winery, Petit Verdot and Cab Franc particularly prevalent, so that'll kind of tell you what to do with those varietals when you get them into the winery. But I think getting more studies on particular varietals' impact from the smoke could be important going forward as we learn to establish new vineyards, because wildfires aren't going away. It's just a matter of how are we going to deal with them in the future. And so I think it's going to help decide smoke or fermentation protocol, as well as whether or not to pick the grapes or not, because there may be a vineyard with low-grade smoke. But with Petit Verdot, you may want to just file an insurance claim on that and then bring in the Cabernet Sauvignon that's right next to it, and it might be just fine. So I think we're going to learn a lot of things about this in the future going forward.
Cool. Thank you, Brandon, very much. So one thing that was interesting is, I raised my hand when I didn't taste that smoke. And I think every winemaking team, hopefully you have someone on your team who is a good smoke taster. And fortunately for me, our associate winemaker at Sokol-Blosser, Robin Howell. Robin, are you out there? Oh, good. Oh, yeah, there she is. Okay. Robin is that person on our team who can taste smoke. So if you can't, make sure you find someone who can. So that's important. Okay, Brian.
Thanks, Alex. Well, first thing I would say is, Brandon, the thing of varietals is really interesting. We have seen in Southern Oregon, I've been working at a custom crush winery for the last 8 years, and we usually see 30 to 35 different varietals. And the ones that stand out for smoke impact in the wine are Pinot Noir, Grenache, Cab Franc are the three most challenging ones to work with. And we make Grenache, Cab Franc, and Pinot Noir there a lot. So we run into it a lot, but there's a lot of other grapes that can be grown, same vineyard right next to it, beautiful wines that come out, smoke never appears even years later. So those are the most susceptible varieties that we've seen. And I'll say 2020 really sucked. It was a really hard year. I watched our valley burn. I watched a friend lose his winery, evacuated our winery because the fires were within a mile or two of where we were. It was a really hard year. Following that, we had so much smoke in the valley. We were wearing COVID masks over our smoke masks and processing outside when the air quality was 600 or 700. It was a really rough year. But the silver lining, at least in Southern Oregon, was the smoke that we had didn't impact our wines. I'd say very few wines showed any sign of smoke. And I think this goes back to something else you said, and I know we've talked about this a lot, Dr. Tomasino, is we had fires in our valley. It was so windy that fresh smoke blew away. The next day, smoke came in that had been hanging out over the ocean for about 3 days and socked us in. So we had terribly high smoke, but we had stale smoke. And thankfully, that smoke didn't impact our vines a lot. So what I'm actually going to taste with you today is a wine we made for a custom crush client who was nice enough to share this, and it's Willamette Valley Pinot Noir from a site in the Eola Hills close to Salem. So that was the good thing. So yeah, for the last 8 years, I worked at a custom crush winery. We worked with fruit from all over the state. In 2020, we picked this fruit from the Eola Hills area. It was mechanically picked. It was after the smoke exposure. It was picked cold at night, shipped down to us. We got it within 12 hours of picking, and as soon as we tasted that fruit in the picking bins, no fermentation or anything, it already tasted like smoke. And I'd never seen anything like that. Like you said, oftentimes this presents itself 6 days in, 12 days in, a month after it goes to barrel, but this tasted like cherry barbecue sauce in the bin before we even started fermenting. It was kind of nice, but we just knew we were up against something challenging. So we did everything we could. We've had a lot of smoke protocols for how we ferment the wine. Commercial yeast right away, get it going. We've used untoasted oak chips. We've fermented. We did try to build up the biggest wine we could. We've learned that within 4 days of fermentation, most of the smoke's out of the skins already. Ferment Pinot Noir for 4 days and press it, it tends to be really thin, so you don't have that fruit, that sugar, or anything else to cover it up. So we've found that building the bigger wine's the better answer, but then pressing really gently and making strong press cuts. Settle it, rack it, get it off the gross lees, and get it into a barrel. And those are the things we did with the wine. And this wine, from the moment we got it was smoky through fermentation, it got worse. We got the barrels and got even worse than that. So it never improved. But we waited a while to see what would happen. I think one of the challenges with smoke is it's an equilibrium equation. There's bound smoke, there's free smoke. Over time, bound and free come into equilibrium. But if you act too quickly, maybe that hasn't happened yet. In fact, one of the risks that we have, and the reason I'm sharing this wine with you today, is this was treated last summer. And we were trying to understand how this wine was going to evolve. Would that treatment that made the smoke go away lead us 9 months later to have a wine that became smoky again? And that was probably our biggest fear. You treat it, it tastes great. You blend it, you put it in a bottle. You get that bottle out on the shelf 9 months later, and it's in people's hands, and it's smoky again. And that was part of our concern with treatment and part of why we're tasting it today. But one thing we've been able to do, we worked with Wine Secrets down in California. They have a sweet spotting trial, and we've done this with anything that involves RO. So we've done it with volatile acidity. We've done it with alcohol as well, where you can send down a case of wine. They'll send you back 6 bottles. And this let us understand, A, that RO worked, but they also sent it back at 100% treatment, 200% treatment, and 300% treatment. And they gave us some idea of how long we'd have to run the machine to make it work. You said 50% was where you went. We actually went to 225% on this wine. Now, it was a really good RO machine. Like I said, it splits it. It keeps things pretty separate. So we were really mostly only treating the smoke and the water and the alcohol. However, there is always some stripping when you do this, and that was the biggest challenge with this wine. But we did. We ran it through 225%, and like you, I completely agree. We were tasting every 15 minutes on a reasonably big tank of wine just to make sure it didn't get past us. And there was a spot where it was smoky, it was smoky, it was smoky, and then it kind of turned the corner all of a sudden. And we ran it for only a few minutes after that and stopped. And here you can taste it. It's glass 4, but we have a number of tasters in the lab that are all pretty sensitive to smoke since we've been working with it as much as we have in Southern Oregon. Nobody could perceive smoke anymore. The fruit had bounced back. The body was lightly stripped. And in this case, the wine wasn't excessively ripe in the first place. So the biggest thing we saw was the stripping of the body brought out a few things we didn't love about the wine that we weren't tasting before we went to the smoke treatment. It's just a little bit thinner than we'd like, and there's definitely a slight bit of green tannin in this wine. And those came out more obviously after the RO treatment. They weren't there because the smoke and the bigger body of the wine had covered them up. And one of the biggest fears we had was, does smoke come back in this wine? So as you taste it, if you've all tasted it, how many of you taste smoke at this point in this wine? That's what we were hoping for, was that yeah, one hand? that 9 months later, we wouldn't see smoke. And so what?
Could be Robin who tasted that.
It might have been.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, someone's tasting the smoke standard still. But ultimately what we decided to do with this was we took half of the wine that we treated and blended it into a larger lot. In that case, that wine was big, it was robust, it blended in really beautifully, whereas trying to blend this wine before smoke treatment, even 5% destroyed that wine. So we were able to use this. We used half of it in the 2020 wine. That wine's out in the market. Most of it's sold already and tasting great. There's no signs of smoke there. We held on to a piece of the wine to possibly blend into the 2021 as well, as long as we didn't see the smoke come back. Again, keeping it under that 5% threshold. But I think that was the important thing for us was we learned this is the first time we've actually treated a wine for smoke beyond just the actions we've taken in the winery to try to make sure that we don't get it in the first place. And I'm happy with the process. We took a wine that wasn't usable and made it usable, managed to keep the volumes of the wines where we needed to be. We were happy with the ultimate blend. But I think the biggest drawback, I would say, to this wine is it wouldn't stand on its own. I would not want to bottle this wine and put it out under that customer's label, or really any label, just because of how much thinner it is than it was before. But the good news is it did work to treat the smoke, and it didn't come back at least 9 months in, which leaves us pretty confident that it won't come back and cause problems in the future.
Thank you, Brian. Brian and Brandon, did either of you guys use any, you guys used the mechanical RO, did either use any enzymes in the process of smoke remediation?
Yeah, we've played with enzymes, but we've not found that they do anything with smoke. Trying to cleave off those bound pieces or anything else has never worked. We've done some trials and never found them to be positive. The biggest thing we did was we did additional fining of the wine, or pre-fining of the wine, to see in trials, and a small amount of fining after the smoke treatment also helped improve the wine for other reasons. As some of the other things came out, some of the other tannins we didn't love came out as we stripped the wine a little bit. We did a final fining of it, but that wasn't about smoke. Yeah.
Cool. Brandon?
I had watched several webinars kind of through Washington State that actually recommended the enzyme treatment, but just the thought of artificially oxidizing your wine just was not the right path for what I thought would be the right decision. And that was kind of the point of waiting 10 months, is kind of letting that go naturally rather than actually artificially doing it with an enzyme. And so I'm pretty happy I did not go down the path of using an enzyme to make that go faster, because I probably would have wrecked the wine in the process. So,
Great. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Elizabeth Tomasino. What is new under the sun right now, Dr. Tomasino, with what are the new advances, what you can share?
So there's a lot of stuff that's starting to happen, that's happened a little bit. This is a not entirely complete flowchart of all the research happening up and down the West Coast. I am happy to say, and I have to say thank you to all of you guys, OSU is in the process of renovating for a smoke analysis lab for it. Hopefully will be open in August this year for a bit more throughput than we were able to do in 2020. So having that for all of you, and that did come about because industry went up and lobbied for it, so thank you very much for that. So the research that is happening, and there's many different research, is about determining levels of risk at different points in time. I know it can be very difficult. You have a smoke event. Should you pick your grapes? Should you not pick your grapes? I know we've recommended doing small, fast ferments and getting it tested, but of course in 2020, a lot of people couldn't get those results in any sort of time. So I'm going to go through a few different things, not all of them, but a few things that are happening from determining risk, can we prevent this from happening, and then some of the mitigation aspects. And really all of this research goes together to create a really big sort of diagram or decision tree for what should I do with my product at different steps in time. So something that is going up in Napa, Sonoma, Oregon, and Washington, it's partially up in Washington already, is a very large sensor network specifically detailed for smoke issues in grapes. So it's not the purple air you guys might have seen out there for it. We're looking for real-time measuring in vineyards that we will be linking with grape measurements, a couple other specific measurements where we're going into the vineyard, measuring the compounds we know are the problem. So that eventually, actually, it's all these atmospheric scientists are going to be developing models for forecasting where certain sites might be more problematic, depending on wind and elevation, as well as having a better idea of which smoke is the problem. You know, the burn site was very far away, but it funneled all the air through this smoke through this valley. That might be more problematic than a vineyard right next to the burn location, but didn't have a lot of smoke. So a lot of these air sensors are going into looking at those types of things that we're linking with fruit and wine measurement, and we're hoping to start to expand in the next couple of years for that. So the first lot of this is going out in May in Oregon. Walla Walla, Columbia, Willamette Valley, Umpqua, and Rogue have sensors going up for it. We're also looking at, so there's a lot of air things, and I'm not, those of you who know me, I don't do a lot with atmosphere and air, so I won't do too many more details on that. We're looking to track which compounds are really the problem, and that's something we do in my program. So we created carbon-13 labeled smoke. In life, you are carbon-12 beings, as are most plants. So we're tracking in the smoke, through the grape, through the wine, to make sure we're getting everything. Because I know in research, we think the phenols are very good markers of grape smoke exposure, but not maybe the greatest for figuring out that quality in your wine. So we're looking at a range of things to try and get a better picture, and potentially a better predictor and an easier predictor and less expensive predictor to measure for if you're going to have a problem in there. We have someone who is going to look at some economic analysis after a few years. So based on your decision, how much money does that cost? I think a lot of, in some of the meetings we had, viticulturalists were like, I want to know if I should pick my grapes or not. Should I pick my grapes? Is there something I can do without and still make a profit off of this, or should I just not pick my grapes? So that is a big thing we're looking into for it. We're looking into how to prevent it going into the grapes. I just saw some fun results. We're creating some films that you can spray on your grapes at Verizon, and they actually expand as the grape cluster grows, that either are trapping the smoke compounds or are blocking some smoke compounds from going in. So that's a potential way. We don't think at the moment it can 100% do it, but you can get a significant reduction, and we're going to start trialing that out on the field this year. So that's a fun prevention way. And I know WSU is also looking at a few ways to just stop them from getting into the grapes for it. Then we actually go into grapes and wine, and we'd like to have some better grape markers, so you don't have to do wine and send it out to be tested. You can actually just send your grapes and be tested. And someone is actually working on figuring out a test to see if you should actually send your grapes to get tested, like making that decision, because it's easily $200, if not more, per sample to get your grapes sampled for that. So they're looking at some of those. There's some winemaking aspects. We're trying to find if those small-scale ferments, how well they actually predict up, because of course the dynamics of your fermentations are really different. So we'd like to find something that is more representative that can be used just for smoke compounds. It doesn't taste as nice as when you guys make your wines for it, but something that is a better predictor from that small scale, so you can be confident you measured this, and that's very likely what's happening in your regular size for it. We're looking at some mitigation through winemaking. So a lot of people have looked at fermentation. I know James Osborne is doing some micro-oxygenation steps using oak in there. We have some people looking at the current enzymes aren't great at doing things, but there are enzymes that exist in other microbes that we might be able to use. So we have a microbiologist trying to see if we can get those enzymes in to specifically find those smoke compounds and either transform them into something that doesn't have a smell or taste, or even just break some of those bonds so you can filter it out a lot easier for it, because the RO does work well at filtering out all those free compounds for it. We have risk markers in wine, so which compounds are causing the problem in wine and how the different compounds in your wine affect your perception, because every wine's different. So the thought is eventually figuring out that at this sort of range of smoke compounds, you probably won't be able to do anything. At this range, you can do some mitigation treatments to get it below a perception threshold for it. And then sort of the range, because we do know some of these exist naturally in grapes and wine where this is normal. You don't have to worry about that. There's actually a lot sort of aging that we might be able to do with some of that. We have some new smoke compound candidates that have some interesting reactivity to it that we're working on. But we're also doing some consumer testing to figure out how variable people are, because I'm sure you saw I didn't really taste a lot of smoke in the first wine for it. And I want to say probably 2/3 of you guys were like, yep, definitely, but about 1/3 was like, no, not really. And figuring out those levels for consumers at different varietals, because that can potentially change what you might do with your wines in the long run. And as I said before, all of this goes into risk management. So what are my levels of risk in the vineyard, in the winery, and afterwards, and what are those potential steps that are going to do something once I know where I am with my smoke markers for it. And I'm sure there's many others in there, but I can't remember all of them. We keep adding some things on each year for it. So lots of exciting things, and I was telling Alex, I'm like, 2 to 3 years, we should do another one, and we'll have a lot of very cool information for everyone.
Oh, most definitely. I don't think this is an issue that'll be going away anytime soon. We're going to open it up now for a couple. We got 2 microphones, one right over there, one right over there. If anyone has questions, if you don't have questions, I have more questions. So I'll just warn you. So does anyone have any other questions?
Alex, just a clarification. Glass 4, is that the finished wine that had 5% blend, or is that the filtrated wine kept up?
Scott's asking a question about glass number 4. Brian, I think you heard the question.
Yes, that's 100% of the treated wine only. This is what was blended in at 5% to something else. So this is pure treated wine.
Cool. Anybody else? Oh, I see someone walking to the mic.
So on your mitigation processes that you used to eliminate the smoke, what was the additional cost to the winemaking process for those mitigation?
Well, when we looked at the RO, we believe that it was about $3 a gallon to do all the work to make that happen, both to hire the company to do it, losses in terms of just small volume losses, as well as the labor to make it happen. So when you're thinking about wines that cost $20, $30 a gallon to make, adding 10% to the cost of that, and maybe if the wines are more expensive, it would be even less of a percentage. But about $3 a gallon is what we ended up paying to make this wine treated.
Yeah, mine was just a little less than that because I rented the unit and did it myself, which is a really good option for anyone that's familiar with with that type of unit and the RO process. It's really easy. It's just time consuming. So if you want to sit at the winery for like 20 hours and wait for something to happen, like this is your thing. So, but you'll save some money. So.
That's impressive, Brandon, because that's a technical piece of equipment. So well done.
Well, you let an intern run it like 12 hours, and you only do it 8. So
You let an intern run it? That's impressive. That's even more impressive. All right. At Sokolblosser, we did our smoke remediation was the SRX machine and some carbon, and I believe at the end of the day that added up to about $2 a gallon. So, but that's a good question. That's very practical. Okay, anybody else? Oh, here we go.
So not all smoke is as damaging, right? Every different thing that burns has different effects. Has it been established what is the most damaging to the grapes here for us in Oregon? Like what burning is causing the most damage to the wines?
We haven't tested everything, but I can tell
No,
you
why not? Okay.
cars and buildings are pretty gross. And if you compare trees, I know up in Washington I've had I'll use the term opportunity to taste trees versus sagebrush. Sagebrush is pretty gross too for it. Trees are probably the nicer smoke of the lot, if you can say that.
I think the bigger thing that I would say on that is it's maybe less about what's burning and more about where and how close and how quickly that smoke gets to your vineyard. So we've seen all kinds of stuff burn, but we've had fires that are right near a vineyard for a very short time, even when the grapes are green, have far more impact than fires that lasted a very long time, but the smoke came from far away.
I will say this, the compounds we think are the problem, they're in all smoke. So it's sort of, you're talking about the other things that are also contributing to it that can change the quality of your smoke taint.
Okay, you did it. You get beer now. So you probably didn't think that your first industry tasting would be on smoke and have to taste the smoke standard and whatnot, but here you are. Thank you for coming. There's an hour left until 5:30 on the trade show, so don't forget to go and kick some tires. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Brian, Brandon, and Dr. Tomasino, for shedding some knowledge for the rest of us. So thank you all.